In the twilight of the summer of 1944, as bombs still echoed across the European fields, and the world seemed suspended between hope and despair, Edgar Cayce sat for the last time before a rudimentary recording device tucked away in the back of his Virginia Beach home. His hands trembled slightly, not from the weight of years but from the magnitude of what he was about to reveal. For decades he had been known as the sleeping prophet, the man capable of diagnosing illnesses and predicting the future in a trance state. But on that quiet afternoon, with only a few months of life remaining, he decided to break the most sacred of his silences. The recording remained hidden for 80 years, kept in a wrought iron safe, protected by seals and oaths that now finally can be broken. In it, Cayce speaks not as the seer who healed through dreams, but as an elder who had glimpsed the thinnest veils between worlds, a man who knew how to recognize when the soul prepares for its great return journey. His words, recorded in a raspy but firm voice, reveal the 7 universal signs that announce when a human being is nearing the end of their earthly mission, signs that transcend cultures, eras, and beliefs, for they spring from the very essence of existence. The first sign, according to Cayce, manifests through a phenomenon he called the calling of loved ones. In the final years of life, he explained with an almost hypnotic serenity, those who are about to depart begin to receive special visits. These are not hallucinations or products of weakened minds, but genuine encounters with those who have already crossed the threshold. Deceased parents appear in vivid dreams. Spouses who departed decades ago emerge as comforting presences in moments of solitude, and children who never came to be manifest as golden lights on the periphery of vision. Cayce described these encounters as love letters from beyond, messages sent to prepare the heart and alleviate the fear of transition. He himself had begun receiving such visits months before the recording, especially from his mother, who always appeared to him smiling, extending her hands as if inviting him to an eternal dance. The second sign, Cayce continued, reveals itself through a transformation in the relationship with time. Those approaching departure begin to experience what he called the temporal elasticity of the soul. Minutes stretch like golden honey when in the presence of loved ones, but days compress into instants when lost in memories. It is as if consciousness begins to detach from earthly chronological constraints, preparing to inhabit dimensions where time is not linear but circular, where past and future meet in an eternal present. Cayce had observed this in himself as afternoons passed slowly when he contemplated the ocean. But entire weeks disappeared without him being able to explain where they had gone. It was, he said, the soul rehearsing its coming freedom. The third sign manifested through a heightened sensitivity to the spiritual world, a phenomenon Cayce christened the awakening of subtle senses. Elderly people nearing transition begin to perceive invisible energies, to sense presences in empty rooms, to hear celestial music that no one else can detect. This is not sensory deterioration, but an expansion of perception, as if the veils between dimensions become progressively more transparent. Cayce recounted how in recent months he could feel the approach of storms days before any meteorological sign, how he could perceive the sadness of strangers even when they smiled, how he felt the presence of angels in the most commonplace moments of the day. It was, he explained, the soul tuning into higher frequencies, preparing to inhabit planes where communication transcends words and gestures. The fourth sign revealed itself through an inexplicable urgency to organize material, life, an impulse that Cayce called the instinct of conscious farewell. Those approaching departure feel an imperative need to put everything in order, to resolve old pending issues, to distribute belongings, to write unsent letters, and to speak unspoken words. It is not a morbid premonition, but rather an inner calling to leave the world lighter, more harmonious, more prepared to continue without their physical presence. Cayce described how he had spent months organizing his psychic reading files, how he felt the need to embrace people from whom he had distanced himself, how every object in his house seemed to ask to find its definitive place. It was, he said, the ancestral wisdom of the soul operating through the personality, ensuring that the transition would occur peacefully. The fifth sign manifested through a profound change in the nature of dreams, a phenomenon Cayce called the visions of the threshold. The dreams of those approaching departure become extraordinarily vivid and replete with spiritual symbolism. They are not nightmares or fantasies, but true dream journeys that serve as preparation for the great voyage. Dreams with paradisiacal landscapes, encounters with beings of light, visions of crystalline cities, and experiences of conscious flight become frequent. Cayce explained that these dreams were, in fact, anticipatory visits to the higher planes, opportunities for the soul to familiarize itself with its new home. He himself had begun to dream of an infinite library where all the knowledge of the universe was available, where he could converse with masters of all ages, where he finally understood the mysteries that had intrigued him throughout his earthly life. The sixth sign revealed itself through a transformation in the way of loving, a state that Cayce christened expanded love. Those approaching transition begin to experience a form of love that transcends the usual human limitations. Romantic love, family love, brotherly love, all dissolve into a universal compassion that embraces not only those close by, but strangers, animals, plants, and even those who were formerly considered enemies. It's as if the heart prepares to inhabit dimensions where love is the only law, where separation is merely an illusion, and where all souls are recognized as facets of the same divine light. Cayce described how he'd begun to feel an inexplicable tenderness even toward the insects he found in his garden, how he could forgive with absolute ease grievances he'd carried for decades, how he felt his heart had become a portal through which universal love could flow without obstacles. The seventh and final sign, the deepest of all, manifested through what Cayce called the great inner reconciliation. Those truly ready to depart experience a profound peace with themselves, a complete acceptance of their earthly journey with all its triumphs and failures. It's not resignation or surrender, but rather a full understanding that every experience, every pain, every joy, every failure, and every victory were necessary parts of a larger plan. It's as if the soul finally manages to see the complete picture of its existence, recognizing divine perfection even in the moments that seemed darkest. Cayce explained that he'd come to see his own life as a sacred book, where each page contributed to the beauty of the whole, where each tear had been a blessing in disguise, where each scar was a mark of spiritual growth. But there was something more in the recording, something that transformed these 7 signs from mere observations into a transcendental revelation. Cayce continued his exposition, revealing that these signs weren't simply indicators of approaching death, but rather evidence of a spiritual transformation that could be consciously experienced by anyone, regardless of age or proximity to physical transition. He had discovered through his deepest mystical experiences that it was possible to deliberately cultivate these states of consciousness, allowing the soul to experience glimpses of what awaited it beyond the veil. During the final years of his life, Cayce had developed secret practices he called celestial preparation exercises. Through specific meditations, guided contemplations, and altered states of consciousness, he had managed to anticipate the sensations that normally only arrived in the final moments of earthly existence. He had discovered that it was possible to consciously invite the presence of deceased loved ones, expand temporal perception, sharpen spiritual senses, cultivate organizational urgency, induce transcendental dreams, expand the capacity to love, and achieve inner reconciliation. The recording then reveals the most extraordinary moment of Cayce's entire experience. On a March night in 1944, during one of his celestial preparation practices, he had experienced what he described as conscious death. Not a near-death experience, but a deliberate and controlled departure from the physical body, maintaining full consciousness throughout the journey. He had traversed what he called the liquid crystal tunnel, emerging into a dimension where all souls who had ever lived on Earth continued their evolutionary journeys. In that extraordinary dimension, Cayce had encountered not only deceased, family and friends, but also historical figures he admired, spiritual masters from all traditions, and even future versions of himself. He had understood that death was not an end, but a transformation similar to that which a caterpillar experiences in becoming a butterfly. The physical body was left behind like an empty shell, while consciousness, enriched by all earthly experiences, continued its journey in increasingly refined and luminous forms. During this transcendental experience, Cayce had received what he called the revelation of purposes. Each soul that incarnated on earth carried a specific mission, a set of lessons to learn and contributions to offer. The 7 signs of approaching transition were, in fact, indicators that this mission was being successfully completed. They were not omens of an end, but celebrations of accomplishment. Each sign represented a facet of consciousness that had been developed and refined through earthly experiences. The calling of loved ones indicated that the soul had learned to maintain loving connections that transcended physical death. The transformation of time revealed that consciousness had expanded beyond the limitations of linear temporal constraints. The sharpened spiritual sensitivity demonstrated that the channels of subtle perception had been opened and purified. The organizational urgency showed that the soul had developed a sense of responsibility and care for others. The transcendental dreams evidenced that the imagination had been elevated to visionary levels. The expanded love proved that the heart had learned to embrace all of creation, and the inner reconciliation confirmed that wisdom had been gained through the integration of all experiences. Cayce had also realized that these signs could manifest at any age when a person prematurely completed their earthly mission, whether through a particularly intense life or accelerated spiritual growth. Children who departed early often demonstrated some of these signs, as did young adults who had lived exceptionally meaningful lives. Chronological age was irrelevant. What mattered was spiritual maturity and the fulfillment of individual purpose. But the most impactful revelation of the recording came in its final moments. Cayce described a vision he had received during his conscious death experience, a vision of the future of humanity and the role each soul played in the grand cosmic plan. He had seen that Earth was a spiritual school where consciousnesses came to learn specific lessons about love, compassion, creativity, courage, and wisdom. Each life was like a semester in this universal school, and death was simply graduation to more advanced levels of learning. He had understood that some souls chose longer lives to experience a wider variety of lessons, while others preferred shorter but more intense lives. Some came to teach, others to learn, and many to do both. The important thing wasn't the duration of life, but the depth of experiences and the quality of growth achieved. Cayce also saw that the 7 transitional signs were gifts offered by creation itself to make the passage smoother and more conscious. They weren't biological accidents or psychological coincidences, but divine mechanisms designed to ease the transition between worlds. Each sign was a bridge connecting earthly experience to spiritual reality, allowing consciousness to gradually adapt to the new conditions of existence. The recording ends with Cayce making a prophetic statement about what would happen to his own knowledge after his passing. He foresaw that his revelations would remain hidden for decades, awaiting the right moment to be revealed to humanity. That moment would arrive when the world was undergoing great transformations, when people began to question more deeply the meaning of life and death, when spiritual seeking became an urgent necessity for the survival of the species. He anticipated that his message about the 7 signs would be especially relevant to future generations, who would face the aging of their populations with fear and resistance, trying to artificially prolong physical life without understanding the spiritual purposes of natural transition. His revelation would serve as a guide to transform the fear of death into a celebration of continuity, to see the approaching signs of transition not as symptoms of decline, but as evidence of spiritual accomplishment. Cayce concluded his secret recording with a whispered prayer, asking that his words find the hearts ready to receive them, that they serve as comfort to those facing the proximity of their own transition or the loss of loved ones, and that they inspire everyone to live their earthly lives with greater awareness, purpose, and love. In the months following the recording, those who lived with Cayce witnessed in his own life the manifestation of the 7 signs he had described. His wife, Gertrude, later recounted how he had begun receiving nightly visits from his mother and, Other deceased relatives, how he spent hours contemplating time in an unusual way, how he demonstrated even more acute spiritual sensitivities than normal. He had meticulously organized his files and belongings, had begun having extraordinarily vivid dreams about celestial landscapes. His love for all creatures had become almost tangible, and a profound peace had settled in his presence. When Edgar, Cayce physically departed in January 1945, those who were close described his transition not as a death, but as a gentle falling asleep, similar to the trances that made him famous, but this time without a return to the physical body. His face held an expression of absolute serenity, and many reported feeling a luminous presence in the room during his final moments, as if celestial beings had come to accompany him on his journey back home. The hidden recording remained guarded, according to his instructions, awaiting the appropriate moment for its revelation. That moment has arrived now, as humanity faces profound existential questions about aging, death, and the meaning of life. Cayce's words offer a revolutionary perspective on these universal themes, transforming fear-inducing concepts into sources of understanding and peace. His 7 signs are not merely descriptions of phenomena that occur naturally in the final stages of life, but also invitations for everyone, regardless of age, to consciously cultivate these elevated spiritual states. By doing so, it is possible to experience in advance the peace, expanded love, and wisdom that await beyond the veil, making the present life richer and more meaningful. Cayce's final message resonates through the decades as an eternal echo. Death is not the opposite of life, but its consummation. It is not an interruption of the soul's journey, but its continuation on higher planes. The 7 signs are gentle reminders that each soul carries within itself the seed of eternity, and that recognizing and honoring these signs, both in ourselves and in others, is one of the most sacred responsibilities of the human experience. Thus, the secret words of the sleeping prophet continue to echo, offering comfort to those approaching the great transition, understanding to those accompanying loved ones on this journey, and wisdom to those seeking to live their earthly lives with full awareness of their divine purpose. The 7 signs cease to be dreaded omens and become acknowledged blessings, sacred markers on the soul's eternal journey towards its true home in the infinite light.